Hello everybody, and welcome to tonight's talk. It's great to see such a big turnout here after our weekend of history, the weekend before last. So people aren't historied out too much, which is a great sign. I think it's down to Pippa and the fantastic talk she's going to give us this evening. Just a little bit of housekeeping first. Fire exits, obviously the door you came in, and the exit over here. And if you wouldn't mind putting your phones onto side or airport main mode, that would be appreciated. Thank you very much. First of all, I just want to welcome Pippa and Gary back from their honeymoon. Just got back in yesterday, so congratulations, and all looking very relaxed and ready to go. Both Pippa and Gary have been great supporters of Killiney Historical Society, Killiney History.ie, Killiney Village Residents Association, and the event we had the weekend before last as well. Although you weren't here, your presence was felt, and we really enjoyed the lovely Australian wine that
great.
We had at our launch. Many of you may have had some of that. So I'm thinking back to the first time we met Pippa was, I think, when Killiney Stores was open.
That's it.
And we had a coffee outside, and we went searching for a cross on Strathmore Road, which was a memorial cross that was engraved, we were told, to the memory of William McCabe, who was the gardener in Marino, the house that Pippa is now called Abbey Lea, the house that Pippa is going to talk about. He was shot dead during the burning of the Ballybrack Barracks in May 1920. So we did search high and low for the cross, and unfortunately we just couldn't find it. But thanks to Alice Cullen, who's in the background there, our local historian, Alice pointed us in the right direction, and after a few more attempts we found the cross, and we got some nice photographs, and it features in Pippa's book.
And I'll be talking about it tonight too.
Yeah, so we'll get some more information on that. Pippa will be launching her book, Abbey Lea, Killiney History, at the Dalkey Book Festival. And we're very pleased tonight to have Pippa giving the talk, because Pippa's talk in Dalkey has been fully booked, and she's got 120 people attending that talk, so we're really delighted that we have her here.
I can't believe it.
Sneak preview, and with the QR code, if anybody was interested in purchasing the book, you can go onto the website, and people will explain about that in due course. But I've had a look at the book.
It's just arrived today.
It's absolutely stunning.
So I don't have any to sell because they've literally just arrived, but I'll pass it around. It's €65. I know that's a lot of money, but it is. I'm just trying to cover my costs. I'm not trying to make money here. So it's a quality coffee table book which you can dip in and out of. It's indexed, but do have a look and pass it on, so that if you're interested and want to sort of try before you buy kind of thing, then have a good look.
Yeah. It's a fantastic addition to the written history of Killiney. There isn't that many books specifically relating to Killiney, so this is a super edition, and we're very thankful to Pippa for publishing that book, and we wish you the best of luck. And I think there's a good possibility that you could reach #1 in the book sales.
Oh, I don't know.
Well, I think we'll watch you very close. So
I'd like to make the list. I don't need to come #1 on the list, but
just as a follow-on, this will be the last talk in the series of talks we've had for the spring and summer season. But we are looking at one other event tied into what people will be talking about. The Talbot de Malahide family, who lived in Malahide Castle, did control a lot of Killiney, Roaches Hill, the village, and we're looking at possibly having a trip to Malahide Castle, which we'll let you all know about in due course. And we do get a guided tour there, so just keep an eye out for that, and hopefully you can join us for that. So without further ado, I will pass over to Pippa. And,
okay. Here we go. Thanks, Michael. I'll just keep it on this angle, because that way I can actually see the screen as well. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Hello. So my name's Pippa, if you haven't met me. And we moved here in August 2020 for Gary's job, and this beautiful house, we moved here in COVID. I mean, and we were young and in love, and you know, we're in this amazing house, and I'm like, if only the walls could talk, you know. Why was this house built? Who lived here? How were these grand rooms enjoyed? Was really the beginning of my curiosity. Now, I've made notes of things I need to say on each screen. Okay, that's not working. So, you know, it's thanks to a lot of people from the Killiney History Society that I was able to, I guess, you know, you really need someone to talk about with things. You know, as Michael said, we met a fair few years ago now, where, you know, you hear these stories, you're not sure, and it's amazing who you meet when you're walking the dog around the local area, and they give you a little bit of a nugget of information, and then I'm going down a rabbit hole in the National Library or in the National Gallery or at Trinity College, and it's incredible what you can find out. So where am I talking about? In comparison to where we are here at the Druid's chair, we're at the top of Killiney Hill. The laser pointer, when you point the laser at the screen, it gets neutralised. So I can't laser point, but also I'll get away from the mic and point. So if you follow Killiney Hill Road all the way down, Abbey Lea, which used to be called Marino, is just inland from the Dart station, and it used to sit right on the corner of Marino Avenue West and Killiney Hill Road, and it's about 3 acres in here, and it's got a very, very long driveway. I mean, if you're heading down the hill from here, on the left you'll see the Australian flag. But the little house right on the corner of Killiney Hill Road and Marino Avenue West is actually Eamon's house, Dunlewy. That got carved off in the 1930s, way before the Australian government bought the property in 1965. But it's his little house that I'll be talking about with regards to the murder of the gardener, because that was where he lived. Okay. So this is a short history of ownership of the house that I've been able to uncover, and what's highlighted in green is what I'm going to be talking about tonight. So what I thought I'd do, some people might have heard me give talks previously about the Harry Clarke connection, and what you'll see in the book that's going around is there's a chapter that's dedicated to the relationship that Lawrence Waldron had, who's there in green, had with Harry Clarke. And lots of things happened actually during Lawrence Waldron's time that sort of impacted on the local area. So that's why I'm talking about him. And obviously Harry Clarke's work is just so visual and really lovely to look at. So I've given a couple of talks over the last couple of years just about that one particular chapter of the book, but that's, you know, about a fifth of what's in there. So in order to, I guess, tailor this to the local area tonight, obviously the Killiney History Society as well as the Dorky Book Festival, I'm focusing on some interesting things that I think locals would want to find out that maybe they don't. Now, there's a couple of interesting things that I'll just point out here, especially given that Michael just mentioned Malahide Castle, because the Lady Talbot de Malahide who owned the property is, you know, married into the family, and the reason why she ended up buying Abbey Lea, or it was actually her that changed the name from Marino to Abbey Lea, which is an interesting story in itself, but it's not something I'm going to be talking about tonight. Her husband, James Boswell Talbot de Malahide, he was the 6th Baron and had a heart attack after his horse had bolted in a storm and he was telling off his groom. We would call him a stable hand or a strapper in Australia, but she had to come and find somewhere else to live because they didn't have any kids, and the title and the castle went to her husband's cousin. So she lived in Malahide Castle, and there's some information about that connection, but it's the Malahides that used to live here in Killiney predate her. And I'll just also mention Sir Robert and Lady Margaret Woods are also a very interesting couple. They were so I'll talk a little bit about the relationship that these two men had, but this couple and this man were also very good friends. So I think Larky Waldron, or as he was known, was quite an interesting character. And when I talk about the Harry Clarke connection, Sir Robert and Lady Margaret Woods were just as good friends with Harry Clarke as Lawrence Waldron was. So the beautiful artwork that was in the windows, as well as adorned the walls and was in books designed by Harry Clarke, was there for a very long time, from the time when they all met, which the art historian and expert thinks is from about 1912 through to Harry Clarke's death, really. But obviously these beautiful artworks were in the house until Sir Robert and Lady Margaret Woods sold the property. Well, they passed away and their children sold the property. Okay, so speaking of friendships, this is the oldest map that I could find of the area. I don't expect you to be able to read this, by the way. I'll be zooming in a second. But this map was gifted, well, not gifted, but it's shared with me by Neil O'Donoghue, who owned the number 7 Martello Tower. And, and so I was able to then track it down and get permission from the National Library to include details in the book. So up until the 1840s, the Domville family continued to hold this land and paid an annual rent to the Dean of Christchurch for their estate. Following a change in law allowing the church to sell its lands in 1842, it appears that the Domville family purchased the land outright and continued subletting or selling its property, though it's not clear from the title deed. So this is all of Domville's land, right? So it's enormous. It's the whole of Killiney and more. It's not clear from the title deeds that we have, well, we as in the Australian government, as to whether or not that land was rented or purchased. But there's just, probably a dozen names of people, and it's not because the land is so big. It's not clear what part of the land they were renting, or if they owned it, or anything. But what we can see, so in the book I actually go into a little bit more detail about that map, but what we can see just south of the Martello Tower is a Mr. Willock living just near the Abbey ruin, after which Killiney is named. So Mr. Willock is also mentioned in the Sporting magazine, who on the 17th of July 1799, that year, drove his curricle horse Chanter from the end of St Stephen's Green to his house in Killiney, a distance of 8 Irish miles in the space of 40.5 minutes. And the time allowed him was 57 for a bet of £50. Now in 1799, I think £50 was worth a lot of money. And here he is in 1810, so 11 years later, living on the land where Abbey Lea is. So this is one of the earliest houses that we know of in the area. Now, and this reference to Mr. Willock comes from an unpublished work called Killiney Surroundings by the bookseller William Fernley Figgis. Now, he was known to have written about Killiney and its surroundings from 1916 until his death in 1956. He was a Killiney local. He lived at Desmond, which is now called Padua, just north of the Martello Tower. Now, I also know for a fact that he was very good friends with Lady Joyce Talbot de Malahide, who lived renamed the house from Marino to Abbey Lea in 1950, because I've got her diaries, and the Figguses are over for dinner a lot, which is kind of cool. And I've managed to convince Hodges and Figgis to stock my book, so based on that connection, so I'm pretty thrilled about it. So although his work has never been published, extracts of that are now on the Killiney History website. So if you're interested in the Figgis work, that's where you'll find it. I mean, what a great resource that is. So in my book, I go through all the historical names on the title deeds from 1845, because I think people in the area might want to check their own title deeds and see if there's a connection, you know, and where their house might fit in that puzzle. I found that pretty difficult to ascertain, much more than sort of listing them. Now, this is I don't think I can go backwards, I'm sorry, but that was just a little ad from 1836 saying that the house was available to rent. So prior to finding that 1810 map, that was the first sort of sign that I knew that there was a house on the land. But we've traced it back to 1810. Now, the year later, after that advertisement to rent the house over the summer, there's this little map here. So what you can see from 1837 is Desmond is there. So Padua or Desmond is there. Percy Lodge is there. Dorset Lodge is there. So here's a little Abbey ruin here, and here's Marino. This is Marino. And of course Rose Cottage is here. That I believe it used to be a hospital of some sort. But, you know, still pretty sparse. So in 1845, this is where it gets more interesting, Joshua Mason Chater was a 55-year-old man who purchased this Killiney land, which he called Marino Park. He was a provision merchant whose business was located at Grand Canal Harbour. He had some experience in property development, having previously lived at Purbeck House in Monkstown, where he had built 4 houses. The land he purchased did not include the ancient churchyard and abbey ruins. These went back to the Crown. The title deeds specify that there must be free access to the old abbey along the ancient rights of way or mass passes, and it's these laneways that form the boundary surrounding Abbey Lea as we know it now. So if you're walking down to the Dart, which is here, this is a laneway. This is Marino Avenue West. And this is only by foot can you get around the northern boundary of Marino, and cars can come down this side, right? But this is a private road, Marino Avenue West. And this is an 1874 map. So you can see again the development that's continued, which essentially was the 3 generations of the Chaters that developed the 30 acres that had been purchased. So the only development that was initiated by Joshua Mason Chater, the patriarch, was a 999-year lease for Rathlee to M. Moses in 1847. So that's Rathlee's right down here on the corner of Military Road and Killiney Hill Road, and it just recently sold. I think they're doing it up. It was the second generation of Chaters who led the property development of Marino Park. Charles Henry Chater led the initiative to develop fine houses, many of which are still standing today. With the railway between Dublin and Wicklow opening in the 1850s, the family seized the opportunity to sell houses and land in the area. 2 years following Patriarch Joshua Mason Chater's death, son Charles Henry Chater began developing Marino Park in earnest and negotiated a 500-year lease for land across the estate over a number of years. So the book details all those. But he was a 30-something young entrepreneur and stockbroker, and he negotiated leases for Marino Terrace, Marino Lodge, Salerno, Bonavista, Bella Vista, they're no longer there, Miramar, Court Farage, which was later the Court Hotel and is now the apartments opposite the train station, Campanella, Ardmore, which is now Weesford, Ard Earnan, which I'm sure many people know used to be a safe house for Michael Collins, St Leonard's, Colleen, Mentone, Fortlands, Abbey Lands, Summerhill, which was previously Santa Severina, I think you pronounce it, Otage and Kildoon. The Chaters even detail in 1897, so the year before they sell out of Killiney, a lease granted in perpetuity to Mrs Cope rent-free for Winterslow. Now, I don't know what was Winterslow. It's certainly not around here now. I'd love to find it. But I mean, she might have been the housekeeper or something that got given a piece of land to live there forever rent-free. In addition to the development across Marino Park, Charles Henry Chater had his own home, then called Marino, significantly remodelled in the 1850s. After all, how could you sell grand homes without yourself living in a very fine house? He employed an architect called Boyle to design the renovation, and there was a legal dispute with the builder, a Mr Swallow, regarding the remodelling in 1859 to 1860, and that's the newspaper article about the dispute. In addition to remodelling the house, Charles Chater established the layout for Marino's East Garden, much of which still survives today, specifically its garden room layout that's surrounded by pebbled pathways. Now, the other thing that I'll point out to you is this, the Chaters never sold off the block of land directly in front of the house. This is what afforded it its beautiful views. And this was the case right up until 1965, just before the Australian government bought the property. The property changed hands very quickly in the space of a matter of months, and this got sold off by a property speculator. So the Australian government's never had a view. But I detail that sort of, what happened and how they really made a lot of money very, very quickly. And, the Australian government had been looking at this house for, I think I've actually, there's some notes in Lady Talbot de Malahide's diaries which sort of show a year earlier than I'd expected. And if the Australian government had actually, obviously governments move quite slowly, but if they'd actually acted on the, upon first viewing, then they would have got the view and, or at least made some money off selling the block. So the third generation of Chaters sold the property as well as the block directly in front of the house to the... Yeah, okay, sorry, I've just said that. Charles Chater is believed to have gone to great lengths to have the ancient burial ground and Abbey ruin closed on the grounds that it was overcrowded and unsafe for further burials, though this naturally attracted local opposition, and clearly he did not succeed. All that is left of Charles Chater's home is the entry hall and the 2 rooms downstairs at the eastern end of the house. They are all that survived a fire in 1909 and were incorporated into the arts and crafts design of the house, which survives today. Charles Henry Chater died on the 7th of October in 1874 at his home Campanella on Marino Avenue West, which perhaps at one time, I did find a letter to the Irish Times in the 1960s which suggests that Marino Avenue West was once called Chater's Avenue. The only cultural record that I have of Charles's wife, Mary Chater, is a portrait painted 4 years after her death by Walter Osborne, based on a small head and shoulders photograph but it's not known where this portrait is today. I only just found it in some records of Walter Armstrong's work. So who was Charles Chater? So he's the second generation. Well, I couldn't find very much about him, but I could find some stuff about his children. 3 of Charles and Mary Chater's 7 children were famous tennis players. The family announced the death of their youngest child, Mary, who was 14, in June 1888. Now, that's a year after if I could go back one slide and show you the map again, that was 1887. So, you know, that was the state of the house, and it was, you know, I mean, they had beautiful gardens already laid out, and their 14-year-old had passed. Their eldest son, Joshua David Chater, was a stockbroking contemporary of the following owner of the house, Lawrence Ambrose Waldron, and he is named in the title deeds as the owner of the house when it was sold in 1898. Presumably he'd inherited the property after his mother's death in 1892, or perhaps he'd been gifted it earlier when the family moved, when Charles and his wife Mary moved to Campanella. Joshua David Chater is also named as the executor of his mother's will. I couldn't confirm the number of children that Joshua David Chater had, but it appears that their children were not born at Marino, but later, after the property had been sold. So now I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the 3rd generation, Joshua David Chater, and the nature of his relationship with Lawrence Ambrose Waldron. So Waldron's office is on the left. It's at number 10 Anglesey Street in Dublin and is directly opposite the Dublin Stock Exchange. Number 10 Anglesey Street is considered to be one of the oldest surviving houses in Temple Bar. It is recorded as a house, office and yard in the primary valuation of Ireland, but its exterior was refaced and an interior remodelled in 1898. Now that's the same year that Waldron purchased Marino, 1898. So he does up his townhouse, and the architect happens to be his cousin and good friend, whose nickname is Lal, but his name is Lawrence MacDonald. And he's the guy that in 1909, after the fire, that then does this beautiful arts and crafts redesign of the building in Killiney. Chater's office, so Joshua Chater's office is diagonally opposite at number 30 Anglesey Street, so it's a little bit further down the road and on the same side as the Dublin Stock Exchange. And it has this familiar feature of this Queen Anne revival design with this beautiful oriel window on the first floor. Now that was built in 1895, so I think they're showing off and I think they're trying to impress each other, you know. Now Waldron was born at Ridge Hall in Ballybrack. Now that is now an apartment block, but it is directly opposite the Apple Green service station at the lights at Ballybrack. And the original house is still there, but it's really kind of, the apartments really sort of overlook it. And it used to be a doctor's surgery before it was closed recently. Joshua Chater was 6 years older than Lawrence Waldron, and both had been childhood friends growing up in the Killiney Ballybrack area. In looking for connections between these two men, I came across some interesting things. It appears that these men were such great friends that as a mark of friendship, Waldron left some of his possessions to the Chater family in his will. So the title deeds that are in the possession of the Australian government include Lawrence Waldron's will, which is really pretty interesting and insightful. Can people read that, or do you need me to read it out?
Read it out, please.
You want me to read it out? Okay, so he says to Mrs. Belinda Jellett, so that's her married name, her maiden name was Chater, the dark brown vine leaf decorated dessert set and the following articles, which belong to her brother and my dearest friend Joshua David Chater, to be retained by her or given if she approves in my name to the son of said Joshua. A, gold sleeve links, which I assume are cuff links, or maybe they're the stretchy things that push your shirt up. Gold the silver snuff box with sporting scenes engraved on it, a silver mounted cane, a little silver candle or taper holder given to me at Christmas in 1892 and so engraved. This I wish her to retain herself. And this is a lovely, I'm not going to read this one out, but this is a lovely description of the men collecting Waterford crystal, and and it actually also mentions Abbey Lands in there too. So, quite interesting. But I also found another Killiney connection. Frank Doobie-Dar. So do many people in the room know about this infamous stockbroker? Okay, in 1895, both Joshua Chater and Lawrence Waldron, along with other members of the Dublin Stock Exchange, signed a letter to the Governor-General of Ireland asking that he consider reducing the sentence of Killiney local and former infamous stockbroker Frank Doobie-Dar. A separate letter in the same vein was also written by the working men of Killiney village. So it actually goes to show that Frank Doobie-Dar was pretty popular with everybody. Francis Edward Doobie-Dar was the third generation of Dublin well-known stockbroking family, and he completed his apprenticeship in 1872 with the Dublin Stock Exchange. So he was a contemporary of both these men, and he lived just behind the pub here off Glenalua Road. The family stockbroking business had a strong reputation for financial management, and many people trusted their life savings with the firm William George Doobie-Dar and Sons. Frank was known to be a man of charm, with a big presence at 5 feet 10 inches and weighing 24 stone, and his friends called him the Baron. Frank was a trustee of the broader family's French Huguenot Fund. From 1874 he acted as treasurer. This and many other funds under Doobie-Dar's control were invested in a diversified portfolio of shares with the aim of the dividends to be used to support the poorer descendants of the Huguenot families. In order to finance the remodelling of his new Killiney home, which was then called Stoneleigh, I think, Frank borrowed heavily from the banks, depositing shares as collateral in each case. He encouraged his clients, many of them elderly and many personal friends of the family, to purchase certain stocks which he then unlawfully converted to his name for his own use and benefit. The French Huguenot Fund suffered. Many Dublin families were impacted. Frank clearly knew how to put on a brave face though, because in October 1890 he was elected the president of the Dublin Stock Exchange. 2 months later he was ruined with debts of more than £100,000. Frank was jailed for financial fraud on the 20th of October 1891, a scandal that rocked Killiney and Dublin's financial industry. The Dublin stockbrokers who were signatories on the letter to the Governor-General of Ireland believed that on account of Doobie-Dar's ill health while incarcerated, his punishment has been sufficient even up to the present to justify stating that the injury done has fully expired. I mean, you can see this is what he looked like going in and this is what he looked like coming out. Doobie-Dar was released early from prison a year later in November 1896. His time in prison was almost 3 years shorter than his original sentence of 8 years. Now, George Bernard Shaw is believed to have immortalised Frank's true personality and character in the character of the same name in his play called The Doctor's Dilemma, which was produced in 1906. Shaw thought that Doobie-Dar had only two failings: money and women. Shaw may well have known Frank personally. They both lived in the Killiney and Dalkey area, and Frank often was referred to by his family as the actor. Before his conviction, Frank had a base in Paris and he was known to have a fondness of French actresses. An actress is believed to have accompanied him to South Africa in 1897, where he lived out the rest of his days. Now, there's a detailed account of this on the Killiney History website, so it's available for anybody to read there. There's also a book that was published in 1999 called The Doobie-Dar Story by Maria Wotton, which provides, really great insight. But who was Larky Waldron? So, Lawrence Ambrose Waldron was born at Ridge Hall in Ballybrack into a wealthy Catholic Tipperary family and came to be a well-regarded Dublin stockbroker, patron of the arts and nationalist MP. His career as a stockbroker was hugely successful, joining the profession in 1881. In 1896, he joined the directorate of the Dublin United Tramways Company and eventually became chairman. He succeeded James McCann both as chairman of the Grand Canal Company and as a member of Parliament for St Stephen's Green Division of Dublin in the nationalist interest. He was also a director of the Gas Company, a Commissioner of National Education, a member of the Senate of National University and on the governing body of University College Dublin. He also served on the boards of the Dublin and Kingston Railway. He was the chairman of the Kingston Railway and the Great Southern and Western Railways of Ireland. He was a governor of the National Gallery of Art, a trustee of the National Library and a commissioner of charitable donations and bequests. When he retired from Parliament in 1910, he was sworn of His Majesty's Privy Council in Ireland in 1911. The Dictionary of Irish Biographies, which is a fantastic resource by the way, says his friends included literary figures like Oliver St John Gogarty, George Moore, Thomas Bodkin and John Synge, who knew him as Larky, and he was renowned as a raconteur and an Epicurean. A collector of books and art, he immersed himself in the literature of the Celtic Revival. His sumptuous home on Killiney Hill reflected his literary and artistic tastes and became a regular haunt for many of Dublin's artistic community. Waldron and his famous dinner parties even inspired poetry by Oliver St John Gogarty, and I managed to locate a 22-verse poem describing these debaucherous, wonderful dinner parties, and I published it in the book. Now, I don't think it's ever been published before. It's been referred to and a couple of lines quoted, but never in full. And I'm not going to read it out because I think it's got full of in-jokes and tricky language, but it's definitely worth having a read. Now, I've got a quote by Gogarty about Larky, which is just as fun though, and that's actually in this book here. It's called Wigs on the Green. So he was a member of the St Stephen's Green Club. And so this is what Gogarty thought of him. Where am I? One member, Lawrence Waldron MP, known to his wide circle of friends as Larky, became in 1912 the first patron of the young stained glass artist Harry Clarke and remained so until his death in 1923. It was through him that the latter was introduced to so many of his other customers and patrons. Waldron was by all accounts a larger-than-life figure in more senses than one. George Moore refers spitefully to his obscene bulk, but Gogarty painted a kindlier picture of the man. I admit that Larky is a substantial man. He weighs 400 pounds and over. But then he is a stockbroker to the Catholic Church. Larky has to do the sums for the bishops and the archbishops and invest money for the Little Sisters of the Poor. He lives sumptuously in his beautiful house on Killiney Hill. Yes, Larky is a great fellow in every sense. He sits in his office on Anglesey Street with 2 telephones and 4 mantelpieces by Bossy in the room. He wears a skull cap of black silk topped by a large pink rhododendron. He hasn't seen his feet in years. Walter Starkey called him Dublin's fattest man and described one of the notorious Sunday lunches at Marino in his autobiography, along with anecdotes of Larky in and around Killiney. And I'm pleased that I've got permission from the publisher of that book to actually recount them in my book as well. Ned O'Connor, a former station foreman at Killiney and Ballybrack stations, tells the story. Local law has it that Waldron read his morning newspaper on the train each morning on his way into town, but at one particular morning he left the paper on the train. A wide-awake newsboy at Westland Row Station, seeing him without a paper, tried to get him to buy one, which Waldron gruffly refused. Minutes later, the newsboy saw his chance to get even. As the cabman was trying to manoeuvre the oversized Waldron into the cab, He asked him, "Where to, sir?" And the newsboy quickly chipped in, "For God's sake, get him to the rotunda fast." I've also found some letters in Harry Clarke's manuscripts at the National Library where he refers to him as the great man. I saw the great man today. He's in good form, you know. Oh, God damn it. I'm sorry that I've just skipped past that photograph of him. Joseph Hone, who was a publisher, Irish writer, literary historian, critic and biographer of George Moore and W.B. Yeats, lived nearby at Palermo on Killiney Hill Road and describes Larky in an essay that I found in the UCD Hone manuscripts. It was owing to his immodest bulk that I came to know Waldron so well. Exercise was recommended, and soon after we met, I was invited to join him in a walk, which he took after breakfast each weekday morning. Bound for the 10 train from Dorky, he would set out from his house near the Killiney train station at 9 and toil valiantly up the Strathmore Road, where I would be waiting for him at the Temple Hill Gate. Now, I think everybody in the room here, if you're local, knows who lives at Temple Hill now. Now, that's where Joseph Hone's father used to live, and Joseph Hone's father built Temple Hill. A heavy climb, but he had his reward in the prospect of Killiney Bay from the Vico. "I have never seen anything more beautiful in all my travels," Waldron used to say. I have memories of longer walks with him than these, of one from Dublin by the tram line to Dorky, of another through the Phoenix Park to the Knockmaroon Gate and back, with a cab alongside us in case he should tire. He was the most companionable of men, and looking back on those long distant days, it seems to me that I never found him out of form. Yet he often spoke of the boredom he had suffered in his childhood, and in reflective moods, Shakespeare's words used to come to his lips. "Rightness is all." Many commented that Larky had a physical resemblance to King Edward VII, although Waldron was shorter in stature and much fatter, though he had the same shaped head and beard. It was also thought that Waldron carried himself with the air of a man accustomed to deference, which perhaps also struck a likeness. The effect was sufficient to cause him, during a motor tour of England, to be mistaken for the monarch travelling incognito. Dr. William Starkey and his wife, who were very dear friends of his that lived at Undercliff, were with him as they entered a hotel at Penzance, where the proprietor took the Starkeys aside and asked in hushed tones, "Could it be that we have the honour?" Now, these are some... I go into Waldron's politics as well as Sir Robert Woods's politics in the book. I mean, I don't have time to talk about them today, so I'm just going to skip over them. But the one interesting thing that I think is worth of note is, you know, Waldron was a nationalist. His friend who bought the house off him after he died was an independent unionist. We know that Gogarty was a Sinn Féiner. You know, all these men were from every different type of political background, and they all combined and enjoyed themselves at Marino. And I think, well, as someone who's only been living here for 4 years, you hear a lot about the conflict, but you don't hear a lot about the collaboration. And it's really nice to actually have a documented that that's what actually happened, and it certainly happened at this house. Okay, so I'm moving on to the gardener. So William McCabe, a man who had been working as the head gardener at Marino for about 10 years, was tragically shot and died of his wounds on Strathmore Road in Killiney on the evening of the 12th of May 1920. At the time of his murder, he was engaged to be married, and he'd been living on the property and the southern gatehouse at the main entrance of Killiney Hill Road, which is now called Dunlewey. And as I say, it was carved off long before the Australian government purchased the property. I think that was in Sir Robert Woods's time, but it's not actually a part of the title deed, so I can't be sure. William McCabe's shooting is directly linked to the burning of the Ballybrack barracks on the same night, then located on Wyatteville Road in Ballybrack. McCabe seems to have been in the wrong place at the wrong time. 2 IRA volunteers also died as a result of events that night. Thomas Dunn and Peter Meany died in the following days, suffering from burns. Now I'm going to give you a bit of context because I certainly needed it being an Australian. The burning of the Ballybrack barracks was a strategic manoeuvre by the IRA as a part of the Irish War of Independence. In the lead up to the events at Ballybrack, there had been numerous reports in the British media that special forces, or black and tans, were about to be sent from Britain to Ireland to address the intensifying IRA campaign. In anticipation of this, volunteers from the IRA's 6th Battalion, based at South County, Dublin, strategically planned to destroy British bases in the area with the aim of preventing the barracks being available for use by the black and tans. The attack on Ballybrack was one of 70 that was coordinated across Ireland on the same day with the same aim. So in Dublin, similar attacks occurred at Blanchardstown, Bessborough, Crumlin and Killiney. In all, 70 barracks buildings and British government offices were destroyed. So in the military archive, the Chief of Republican Police and Vice Commandant of the 3rd Battalion Dublin Brigade, Simon Donnelly, says this: the destruction of the RIC barracks was to prevent their reoccupation by the British forces. The others, income tax and customs officers, a blow to the British civil arm. We had a small number of casualties, a few men being killed by exploding petrol tins. 2 men lost their lives in Ballybrack. So the burns, I think, were, exploding petrol tins, which sounds pretty horrific. It's estimated that several hundred IRA volunteers were involved in the operation to destroy the Ballybrack RIC barracks under the command of Peter O'Mara, who was a serving member of that 3rd Battalion, and he was also a member of the 5th Battalion Engineers. No British soldiers or police were in the barracks at the time. They had been relocated the year prior to Cabinteely. It was only the wife and children of the RIC's Sergeant Hurst, who lived at the barracks, on the barracks in a site called Fernmore, who were present. Now, if you want to know where that barracks was, so you know how I was just describing where Ridge Hall is? If you think about the lights intersection at Ballybrack, and you're heading down Wyatteville Road to get on the N11, go through the lights, and it's on the right-hand side. I think it's where the nurseries is now called. And it's just, there's houses there, but there used to be an army barracks there. And there's maps that I've got in the book explaining that. So Mrs. Hurst, who was at Fernmore, was present, but the IRA volunteers gave her time to gather the children and her belongings and flee to the safety of a neighbour's house. The attackers doused hay and straw in petrol and spread it throughout the barracks and then set it alight. Newspapers reported that the 2 IRA volunteers who were seriously injured were driven to the Mater Hospital by motorbike and sidecar, with one possibly having lost his hand. Patrick Meany, originally from County Carlow, died 2 days after the attack, and Thomas Dunn from West Wicklow a week later. One newspaper reported that at 10 p.m, checkpoints, so it's in the evening, checkpoints were set up on all approach roads to the barracks in Ballybrack. Telephone wires were cut, and commuters coming off the train at Killiney Station were detained on the platform for the duration of the attack. Just so you know, I have looked in all the Garda records, all the military records, all the newspaper records, and anything that's been written about it. So this is a compilation of all of that to try and make sense of it, because I'm not Irish, and it's just unbelievable. So in addition, a cordon of scouts, but the most reliable is actually the newspaper reports, by the way. So that's what I'm quoting. A cordon of scouts was thrown across the whole district, extending from Killiney village in a circle to Loughlinstown and thence to Ballybrack. The same newspaper report said that the volunteers carried revolvers, and while many of them wore masks, some were not disguised. Marino's gardener, William McCabe, was stopped at an IRA checkpoint close to the intersection of Vico and Strathmore roads in Killiney after leaving the gatehouse of nearby property Strathmore, where he had been visiting the property's gardener and his wife, Mr. and Mrs. Coyle. It was upon leaving Strathmore's gates when McCabe, whilst returning home, failed to answer a challenge or disregarded a warning given by some of the scouts thrown around the district by the barracks attackers and was shot. That's according to the Evening Echo that was published 2 days later on the 14th of May 1920. Now, this is a map that I've got in the book, and it's actually longer, so you can actually see where the barracks are, where Waldron lives, where where Ridge Hall is, and just get a little bit of perspective on where. And here's the code for all the numbers here, but I'll just keep reading so you can kind of take that in while I'm talking. McCabe was shot on Strathmore Road near the bottom gate of Palermo, and his body was taken into Palermo's glass house and later inspected by a local Killiney doctor, Dr. Joshua Pym. Now, Joshua Pym lived at Socorro, and many people might know that he was a Wimbledon champion. He was a singles champion, but also a doubles champion, and his doubles partner was Frank Stoker, the cousin of Bram Stoker, who wrote Dracula. And by the way, Bram's brother, Thornley Stoker, was very, very good friends with Waldron. He was his executor of his will. And the next guy that bought the house, Sir Robert Woods, his first son was called Thornley Stoker Woods. He was his mentor as a physician. So Joshua Pym comes up from Socorro into the glass house at Palermo to inspect the body, which was later removed from Palermo's glass house and taken to the cottage at Marino where he lived the following day. Regarding the fatal altercation, now this is the most reliable and I think insightful bit about what happened, trying to make sense of why he was shot, and this was a book that actually Michael shared with me. It's by James Brady. It's called With the 6th Battalion, South County Dublin and the War for Independence. And on page 113, I actually tried to get in touch with that author and he never got back to me, but anyway. On leaving the house, Strathmore's gatehouse, McCabe had encountered a group of volunteers on outpost duty who instructed him to halt. McCabe refused and instead approached the sentries, challenging them. When he attempted to pull a handkerchief from the face of one volunteer, he was immediately fired on. McCabe was hit directly through the forehead and 3 times in the chest before the sentries made off in the direction of Vico Road. James Brady continues in his book, friends of McCabe were adamant that his killer must have come from outside the locality, as anyone acquainted with him in Killiney knew him as an inoffensive man without an enmity held against him. We will never likely know what happened that night, but as a part of this research and thorough investigations of the National Archives and the Military and Garda Archives, it's really just the newspapers, as I say. Now, this is from the Weekly Freeman 10 days after the murder. Henry Patrick Gallagher, Upper Dargyle Road, Bray, stated that on Wednesday night he was sitting on a seat opposite Strathmore Road shortly before 10 o'clock with Miss McAdams. 2 men came along the road about 5 minutes to 10. One came and spoke to him and said he was very sorry to discommode them and said that he had better go down the road towards the station. The witness and the girl went down the road and the 2 men remained behind. The man who spoke wore a McIntosh coat. He couldn't say if he had a revolver, but Miss Ellen McAdams, who was in the company of the last witness, corroborated. Mr. Holmes said if a jury were satisfied that the men in the masks were out in connection with the burning of the barracks and gave some order that McCabe either didn't hear or didn't carry out as a result, he was killed, there could be only one verdict, and that was of murder. It is inexplicable and an unnecessary crime that could not have been committed by anybody who knew McCabe or who lived in the district. Now, this little love seat that couple was sitting on is still there. So the next time you're walking there, have a little seat and think about it. So, and what's not clear, I'm going to go up and point now because it's easy. But so he was visiting people in this little gate lodge. Now this has just been renovated by the Eliases that now own Strathmore. But it's not clear if he came out of this gate and the altercation happened here and he was walking up. So the bottom gate of Palermo is up around the corner and sort of up around here somewhere. So the altercation either happened here and they, were talking or, I don't know, up the hill. But there are other, and I think it's in James, it's in the book that you loaned me, Hardy's book. There is a little side gate that's been bricked in, so potentially when they came out of here at 10 o'clock at night, rather than coming out the main gate, they walked inside the property, and perhaps if there's sentries here, and they probably heard them and followed them up to the gate, and the altercation happened right up near the bottom gate of Palermo, which is, it's all sort of within cooee of one another, sort of, sorry, that's an Australian thing, 5 metres of it all happening just up here. So, but I think it's thanks to the testimony of that young couple that the McCabe family's lawyer, who was presumably funded by Waldron, was able to establish that IRA volunteer scouts had been at that location that night at the time of McCabe's murder and had spoken to the couple. Establishing this link enabled counsel for the McCabe family to successfully obtain some compensation from the state, as this article 6 months later in the Irish Examiner says. Robert McCabe, farmer, Kildare, claimed £750 compensation for the loss of his son, William J. McCabe, a gardener, in the employment of His Honourable Lawrence Waldron, who was shot at Strathmore Road, Killiney, on the night of the 12th of May on the occasion of the burning of the Killiney Police Barracks. Counsel for the applicant said the deceased was shot dead on coming out of the gate lodge at Strathmore Road at about 10 p.m, just at the time that the police barracks was being burnt. The recorder says there is no doubt he was shot by the military. Counsel said there was no doubt because he could produce evidence to show that precautions had been taken. The telephone and telegraph wires were cut and scouts were thrown out for considerable distance all around, and he could produce a person who was challenged by these scouts. The recorder says it was a very cruel murder. Counsel said nobody had a grudge against the deceased, who had no enemies. His father had a little farm of 6 acres in County Kildare, and the deceased had sent him money from time to time. Mr. Waldron had increased his wages the previous week, and he had arranged for his father to come and live with him. The deceased was unmarried, and his sister kept house for him. I presume that she was also a maid in the house. But I can't confirm that because the census records were burnt. His wages were 50 shillings a week and he had a free house, fuel and vegetables. The applicant having been examined, the recorder awarded him £500 and £100 to the deceased sister to be levied off the county Dublin. Now William McCabe's sister, Matilda Rose, she was known as Tilly, lived in the house with him. And later that year, so her brother was killed in the May, and in December she married George Willoughby, who was a mason from Gorey. And I think it's very likely that the cross that we've found carved in his memory was cut by this mason, George Willoughby. And the family's still in County Wexford, and Gary and I have met Tilly's grandson, who hopefully we'll be seeing again next week. So the left-hand side it's a very faint cross, so you don't know really what you're looking for, but it's near the bottom gate of Palermo. So I've outlined it in the book so that you can sort of know what you're looking for. But we also think the reason why the cross is where it is because just to the top right of it, what Michael and I think is a bullet hole. And you can sort of see the piercing in the middle of it. Now, Michael explained this to me because he's an architect and knows these sorts of things, that it's on slate, so water gets behind the rock and then freezes and then it breaks off. So that's why really only half of the cross is visible now. Despite the coordinated attacks by IRA volunteers, the RIC barracks, by IRA volunteers on the barracks in 1920, the Black and Tans continued to occupy Ireland, with Waldron writing to Thomas Bodkin on the 26th of November in 1920 to invite him to dinner at Marino with the following caveat. So that I've been deciphering crazy handwriting for 3 years, but this is what that little square says. It says, settle an early day next week to come and dine at Marino, though you will have to dine early or sleep here, as the Black and Tans are in occupation of Dorky and the 9 train will be the latest to get you home before the curfew tolls. So later in April 1921, it appears that the British Special Forces were continuing to impact Killiney life. In a letter written by Joseph Hone, so he was the guy who lived at Palermo, he also wrote to Thomas Bodkin, and he says, Waldron has been sending, so he used to spend his summers in Italy, so this is a letter that I found in the Bodkin papers in Trinity College. And it's crazy, you know, you're reading about all these other people and picking up all these snippets about Killiney, but Waldron has been sending me news of Killiney, including that of many arrested gardener boys, his own, and one we had at Palermo among them. I had never thought of Edward as a military nature, though he was certainly not industrial either. So the Irish War of Independence continued to disrupt life in Ireland until July 1921, when the Anglo-Irish Treaty was signed, establishing the Irish Free State. And what's also interesting, in the book I detail this in Sir Robert Woods' political life, but he played an important role in that entire process as an independent unionist living in Ireland. So that's worth looking out for too. This is a memorial for the volunteers of the 6th Battalion of the IRA, honouring Thomas Dunn, Patrick Meany, who died that night. Now, this is not far from where the barracks is in Ballybrack. It's on Madden's Lane. It's on a private road. And I tried, we wrote a letter and wanted to try and catch up with the people who had erected that in 2006, and we didn't hear anything back. But if you want to read up more about this, there's lots of information on the Killiney History website. And there's just another couple of really quick, interesting things that I'll talk about before I conclude the preso. This is a painting called La Beauvette Verte, the Green Bar. It was painted by William Leach in 1908 and exhibited the following year at the Royal Hibernian Academy in Dublin, and was bought by Lawrence Waldron to hang in his newly refurbished, rebuilt Arts and Crafts Design House in 1909. The title deeds that we've got show that he left this painting to Harry Clarke. And then Harry Clarke died at a very young age. He was in his early 40s with 3 young kids in the early 1930s, and he gifted it to his best friend Lennox Robinson, who was a playwright and worked at Abbey Theatre and lived at Sorrento Cottage in Dorky, which is also now owned by a very famous U2 band member. So this is what he left. So point 2, he says, I leave to Harry Clarke The yellow Chinese vase now standing on the lacquer cabinet in my study. The picture called The Beau Vert by Leach, now in the dining room, so we even know what room this painting hung in. And he also essentially cancels all debts. Now, in 2012, that painting sold at Adams Auctions for €200,000, and one of our friends said, "Oh, I know that painting. I know where it is. It's at Ballynahinch Castle, Dennis O'Brien's hotel." So, and Gary says, "I know Dennis O'Brien." So we emailed him, and he's given us permission to reproduce this beautiful painting, and it's now hanging back in the dining room. So I'm delighted. I'm just delighted. And I'll just leave you with this in case you haven't seen this beautiful Christmas card that Harry Clark did in 1917, where you can see Braehead in the Wicklow Mountains in the background there. And on the left-hand side, really pretty much right underneath that Sorrento cottage is Mary, the Three Wise Men and baby Jesus with this beautiful archangel flying over Killiney Bay. Yeah. So as I said, the book has literally just arrived today. So hopefully everyone's had the chance to have a look at it. It's available for sale online through buythebook.ie, which is a fabulous website to support self-published authors, and it's run by a young couple in Sligo. And I'm in the process of trying to also make it available just in the Gutter Bookshop in Dalkey. But hopefully I'll have it, I've got 2 weeks, so a week and a half to get myself into gear and try and make it available there. But does anyone have any questions? Hi.
Yeah. Just wondering, thanks very much, that was fantastic. Just wondering, where on Strathmore Road is the cross?
Yeah, so it is very close to the bottom gate of Palermo, and Alice knows because it was actually Alice that showed us. Yeah. Listen, I have been walking the dog up and down that road for, 2.5, 3 years looking for that cross. It's really worth trying to find it. And it's on the, if you're heading up the hill, it's on the left-hand side. Look for a little bricked in, it used to be a pedestrian gate. It was bricked in, I would say, 50 years ago. It's after that on the left-hand side, but it's a little incentive when you go walking to try.